Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, I want to give a talk. I want to say, it seems to me I give the same talk every time, which amounts to the idea that the Buddha's way is simple, but it's seldom easy because we're swimming against a great oceanic tide of our personhood, of our bodies, of our minds. But today I want to talk about Vedana. This is a word spelled V like victory, Edana, with a macron over the final A, which makes it an accent, a super long A at the end. So I'm going to mess that up several times during the talk, because in English, we put the accent on the penultimate syllable, not the last syllable. And I apologize for that in advance. A couple of weeks ago, Peg mentioned a book she's been reading. It's called Deepening Insight, Teaching on Vedanās in the Early Buddhist Discourses. It's by Bhikkhu Analayo. There's a macron over the middle A in Analayo. And just for context, Analayo was born in Germany in 1962, and he's a very prolific scholar, teacher, and Theravadan monk who currently lives in Sri Lanka. In his book, he quotes the Buddha in a prologue at the beginning of the Satipatthana Sutta, saying, "Contemplate the body by establishing mindfulness, diligently energetic, rightly knowing and rightly mindful, overcoming desires and discontent in the world. In the same way, contemplate feelings, mind, dharmas. This is called having oneself as an island by relying on oneself. Having the Dharma as an island by relying on the Dharma, having no other island and no other reliance." And as I said at the beginning, the Buddha's way is simple, or at least sounds simple, but it's seldom easy. If you are like me, you may notice that while you are establishing mindfulness of the body or feelings or mind or dharmas, that you might have had some difficulties overcoming desires and discontent, not just in the world, but in the fabric of your own mind. And you might have found that these desires and discontents, if you could move past them, would very often renew, flaring up in fascinating new ways, like flames in a big campfire. At the root of these disturbances, according to the Buddha, is the quality of mind called Vedana. That word is usually translated in English as feeling, but there's many teachings have been offered about this at Appamada, and I remember Flint explaining that it's a subtler sort of a sense, that it's not feeling, but feeling tone. In the Chinese text called the Samyutta Agama, there is a description of one of the Buddha's teachings in which he explains there are three Vedanās: unpleasant Vedana, pleasant Vedana, and neutral Vedana. What is the condition for these three Vedanās? How do they arise? How do they grow? How do they evolve? That is, these three Vedanās are conditioned by contact. They arise from contact. They grow from contact, and they evolve from contact. So that is contact with the five senses and with the outer world through our five senses. In Mahayana Buddhist psychology, or Abhidhamma, the Vedanās are the second of five universal mental factors. The first one is sparsa, contact, contacting awareness, sense, impression, or touch. The second is Vedana, feeling or sensation. I would say feeling tone or apprehension. Three is sabjna, perception. 4 is cetana, volition or intention. And 5 is manasikara, attention. So Buddhism comes from an oral tradition, and there are lots of lists, but some of them are incredibly powerful and incredibly, pardon me, based in great depth of perception about reality. In my time as a Buddhist practitioner, I've always been fascinated by the Vedanās because they were among the first aspects of Buddhist psychology that I was able to apprehend as true within my direct experience. The teachings on dependent arising or in impermanence or dukkha, sure, I can connect with those as ideas, kind of out there in the world. But Vedanās, they are in here, part of my body, my mind, as an animal, a part of my structure. They shape the way I see the world and myself, even, I would say, before I make that contact that the Buddha says that the Vedanās arise from. They're not so much like windows or eyeglasses that one looks through as, at least to me, as like the structure of my optic nerve. Really, really in there in the middle of everything in terms of perception. I would say for myself that because our body-mind apparatus is set up the way it is, Vedana should come first in that list of 5 universal mental factors. I know that's wrong on a philosophical level, but it feels right experientially for me. There's more. It seems to me that there is a different sense that our mind-body apparatus is constantly scanning itself for things that to have reactions to. And this is part of the kind of like the constant renewing of things that as is explained in Buddha's brain, that we have a inherent negative bias. So the unpleasant Vedana comes first because that's the most important one. And then there's also fact that this is operating subliminally all the time. And it's not just like, I see a thing over there, I have a Vedana that arises from my contact with it. Our bodies are operating all the time, and we are constantly scanning to see if there's something wrong that operates below the level of consciousness, but it's going on. And it's only when it gets, when it peeks over the wall into consciousness, into apprehension or cognition, that we notice it. So I'll give an example. I'm sitting here watching my breath. Unbeknownst to me, my perceptual apparatus is constantly scanning, using my nerves and my sense of proprioception and interoperception to check on how things are in parts of my body. Since most of those parts are operating at a baseline level of okayness, that okayness doesn't register. Then I notice a sensation on the back of my knee. That noticing has already been framed because of the inherent bias of my brain as unpleasant before I have any time to register it or to start thinking about it or to make decisions about it. Unpleasant or unwanted because my system is primed to find unpleasant, unwanted things. As an aside, I'll say, do our systems push us to make sense of pleasant things or of neutral sensations? Not so much. They pass away and quickly, and we may notice them passing away, the pleasant ones. But unpleasant things call for exploration, for proliferation of potential reasons and a range of solutions to evaluate, and for action, usually the quicker the better. When I notice my knee, the process shifts in a split second to a series of evaluations and decisions. If I weren't meditating with the instructions to sit still, like a good meditator, operating somewhere in my mind, I'd simply scratch and the sensation would go back under my consciousness into something else, general okayness maybe. But sitting with it, I spin out more evaluations, all more or less subliminal, and all with their own Vedana tone. I think, oh, it's an itch. Is it moving or is it static? Is it changing? Is it an ant bite? Is it a black widow spider like I saw on my windowsill yesterday? This is becoming intolerable. And now I've spun off into something that Peg has talked about a lot, the way in which our proliferation, what's the word, papancha, of notions takes over. I'm not thinking about my itch anymore. I'm thinking about something that's intolerable. And that language has its own very powerful tone, directing me on what I should be able to do. And eventually I start thinking about subterfuges so I can scratch my knee without anybody seeing me do it while I'm sitting. The Buddha says that the problem most of us worldlings have with the Vedanās is that on the one hand, they lead to further proliferation of ideas that create habits, leading to life stories, habits and then casts of mind and then life stories. And we mistake a feeling tone for reality. And then apprehending something pleasant, we cling to it and get the habit of indulging passions. We apprehend something as unpleasant and we try to end that unpleasantness with action or distraction, feeding the habit of aversion. And apprehending something neutral, we try to substitute something else for it, something more with a more pleasant feeling tone. And that in doing so, we are losing contact with a huge Dharma gate of moment-to-moment experience. And this whole process seldom rises to the level of cognition. It's only when we take time to sit still and let these things trouble us that we can see that they can be troubling. I'm reminded that there's a wonderful composition by the composer Steve Reich from about 20 years ago called Proverb. I don't know if anybody's ever heard it. I'm scanning to see. It's a medieval ensemble singing modern music. One phrase, which is, how small a thought it takes to build a whole life. And I think that's what the Buddha is pointing to here, that just by continuing this process without reflection, without a chance to open it up for consideration, that we can construct whole lives made out of aversion and ignorance and running after pleasure. Worse than that, the Buddha says, is that the Vedanās are the primary vehicle for constructing and reinforcing a sense of the separate self, what Peg has called the great innocent mistake that turns life into suffering for almost all human beings. How to deal with the Vedanās? In the Samyutta Agama, the Buddha says, contemplate Vedanās by perceiving, contemplate pleasant Vedana by perceiving it as unsatisfactory, as dukkha. That is, dukkha in the sense of incapable of being completely satisfying. That's an antidote he is offering. He says, contemplate unpleasant Vedana by perceiving it as the tip of a sword. And this is more difficult. I asked Peg about this, and she said it's a difficult image. Analayo says that there are other translations, the tip of a dart or an arrow, and he connects it with the famous Buddha's the Buddha's famous teachings on the second arrow. Don't make things worse for yourself. And there's a sense that as the tip of a sword of an arrow, that by hanging on to the unpleasantness of it and trying to get away from the unpleasantness of it, we will make things worse for ourselves and create more dukkha. And he says, the Buddha says, contemplate neutral Vedana by perceiving it as impermanent, and just watching it pass away. And he says, if a monastic contemplates pleasant Vedana by perceiving it as unsatisfactory, contemplates unpleasant Vedana by perceiving it as the tip of a sword, and contemplates neutral Vedana by perceiving it as impermanent and bound to cease, this is called right view. The Buddha continues, knowing this and seeing like this in relation to this body of mine, with consciousness, external objects, and any signs, one gains the vision that there is no self, or what belongs to a self, as a basis for the underlying tendency, fetter, and attachment toward the I conceit. Analayo adds, on experiencing the first impacts of these types of Vedana, there is a possibility for choosing how attention will be directed. Rather than letting attention just stay with the particular Vedana, vainly hoping that it will stay if pleasant or disappear if unpleasant, attention can turn inward to discern the empty nature of any experience of Vedana. So going back to what the Buddha says, that you can actually get to right view by contemplating the Vedanās and by, as it were, seeing through them, seeing the fabric that underlies them. And right view is the first step on the Eightfold Path, the frame for the other seven. So this is a big deal. Okay, so Peg, our teacher, says that the Theravadan literature may be seen as suggesting substitution of one idea, unpleasant, for another idea, pleasant, as a kind of opposition of ideas, you know, that one idea is going to push the other away or conquer it or something like that. And she says that from her experience, that's not the way that our psychology works. And she suggests something different. She counsels a different path, which is adopting a sense of compassionate curiosity of how the Vedanās arise. Are they coming out of the survival part of our brains? Are they coming out of our childhood conditioning, which is layered on top of survival parts of our brains? She suggests holding all these impulses, all these feeling tones, when we can recognize them in a bigger container. That, says Peg, is right view. Not making our impulsive feeling tones wrong, but holding them in the light of Buddha nature, which we all share, which is always, always true for all of us. We may have a feeling tone that is in reaction to something inside us or something outside us, but we can always recognize that that's not all of us, and that there is the witnessing part, and there is the greater part that is holding the witness, that is able to hold the emotional tone of these other aspects in equanimity and in compassion. Right view is step one on the Noble Eightfold Path. So being able to meet Vedanās with equanimity and self-compassion is a big deal. I will say there's something else that makes the Vedanās fascinating to me, and this is related to what the Buddha says about the sense of self. And the Buddha, Analayo, quotes the Buddha in his descriptions of Vedanās in conversation with members of the Sangha, as asking a question that has to do with self and not self. He says, the Buddha says, you cannot, about the Vedanās, you cannot ask the question, who feels? Because that question implies that there is a separate self. And what the Buddha is saying is that the Vedanās arise out of causes and conditions. Really like everything else in our experience, although with the Vedanās, it feels different. Still, they arise out of causes and conditions, not from a separate self. And so we shouldn't continue with that mistake. The Samyutta Agama version proceeds in this way. The Buddha says, I do not say that there is one who feels. If I were to say there is one who feels, you could ask, who feels? You should instead ask, because of what conditions is there Vedana? I would answer in this way. In dependence on contact is there Vedana. And in dependence on previous causes, like the conditions of our bodies and minds, there is Vedana. Again, to me, the question of who feels and the emptiness that lies within the answer to who feels is a trapdoor into a kind of a fathomless wonder. Just as I can't say who hears, since hearing seems to happen on its own as a product of my physiology and on through the other 5 skandhas, I cannot say who feels, since the feeling tones that drive everything that follows them are not products of my cognitive mind, nor of my will. I can't stop them or start them. They just come up. So what can I do but hold them? Even though they may appear to me troublesome, what else can I do but hold them in a kind of reverent awe? They are part of the causes and conditions that are unfolding with the whole universe and that connect me with the whole universe. So that's my talk. Thanks for listening. I think that there would be time for a small group activity, if it's possible. Let me outline it first and then get feedback on whether it sounds possible. What I picture is something that will take between 12 and 15 minutes. So that would be to break up into groups of 3. In our groups, that we sit for 3 minutes, and while sitting, we see if we encounter the arising of a Vedana, a feeling tone, either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, and that we note our reaction to it. Do we try and oppose it? Do we try and hold it in a bigger space? How does that go? Just note that, and let it be. Don't try to change anything. Just take note gently. At the end of 3 minutes, and of course we'll have to have somebody in each group as a timer. At the end of 3 minutes, take up to 2 minutes each. That would be 6 minutes in the group, to report to your group mates on what you have experienced. And then finally, take up to 5 minutes for group reflection on what you heard from others. And then the timer will expire and we'll come back. So I invite comments and reflections, questions from me, criticisms.
All right, that was wonderful. It was amazing how quickly it came up. Vedana came up like instantly. Like I didn't work at it at all. But I have a question for you, Joel. You talked about the Buddha recommending different ways to meet each of the 3 Vedanas.
Right.
And what was the I didn't quite catch the way to deal with or meet the positive Vedana. I understand the negative one and the neutral one, but what about the positive?
It was to remember dukkha. Dukkha not in the sense of suffering, as a lot of people translate it, but as unable to provide complete satisfaction. So part of dukkha in that sense is changeableness and temporariness.
Okay.
I was saying in my experience and the time that I was sitting, that the first thing I noticed was a pleasant feeling of coolness on my my index fingers, and that was in a kind of a spotlight that made it so that I had to actually work to shift to see if I could perceive the neutral things going on in my body and or the unpleasant things in my body. That I noticed that I had to kind of look in this direction look in that direction, look in that direction. But I'm sorry, and I'm getting off track by telling that story. But that's the Buddha's advice, is to just remember, yeah, it's pleasant, but it's not going to last. And it's pleasant, but it is it's not all of me. It's not all of my experience. To say all of me is the wrong thing, but it's not all of my experience right now. And so don't feel like, oh, I can pursue this and cling to it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. And are you raising your hand, or?
Yes, I am. Are you talking to Kathy?
Okay. I would. Oh, so Kathy, yes, you go first.
Okay. My experience with it was I was a little bit frustrated because I was in my head trying to see what is different about this versus sitting on my cushion and just being there as things come up. But what was interesting was I was calling this a little bit of frustration. And I think it was Nelda that said something later. And I realized that why aren't I calling this curiosity? Why am I labeling it as frustration?
Well,
and that's exactly the topic.
That is exactly the topic. And did you decide to label it frustration?
Originally, yes.
Okay. Now, it was labeled frustration, but my question is, did you actually make that decision, or did it simply present yourself? Did it simply present itself to you wrapped up in frustration? I would argue the latter, at least in my experience for me, that what happens for me is the feeling tones comes first, and the perception,
Yes.
words that go with the perception come next.
Is after, yeah.
Yeah. So did you, I mean, does that make sense to you?
That's what
you feel it
happened,
that way,
yes.
or was it different? Okay.
That's what happened.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I saw Anne Lipscomb raise her hand in the Zendo.
Hi. So
Hi.
it seems to me that this sort of flies in the face of wholeheartedness. That becoming intimate with something, which is an instruction to all of us, is different than becoming aware of it and then trying to do something with it. Either whether it's trying to see it as dukkha or see it as an arrow point, or then try to go to broaden the container. I mean, it seems like you're making a separation between your experience of the moment and you're deciding to go someplace else. You're deciding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm looking at this, the way I'm thinking about this practice is that it's a kind of training. It's not the instruction to constantly do this all the time in our lives, but it's a kind of training that helps us identify that these feeling tones exist. So what would you say about that?
Well, you began by talking about wholeheartedness. And early in my sitting, I realized I'm never wholehearted about anything. I'm off in 50 directions or 50 million directions or something, you know? But that there is a way in which, by following Peg's suggestions about this, to work, not to work back to wholeheartedness, but to realize that actually wholeheartedness is there in the midst of all those swirling different directions. So she says, trying to work at substituting one idea for another idea, as the Buddha suggested, seems like something that doesn't work very well for us these days. It might have been different in the Buddha's time. But that if you are instead just watching a unpleasant feeling tone or pleasant feeling tone or neutral feeling tone arise as you are sitting still. So it is practice, and it is best practice for when you're sitting still and can really and have the as few distractions as possible, which is still 50 million distractions. But within the sitting still, if you can just hold the whole space in Buddha nature, in compassionate curiosity, that you're not negating your feeling tone. It's still there, but you have a bigger container, right? And that is right view. You are not immediately jumping into reactivity, which is our normal habit. This is unpleasant. I'm going to do something about it. And yet, my hand is scratching my foot before I even know I have a hand reaching for my foot. That immediate reactivity is where we normally are. But by being able to sit still in a sense of compassionate curiosity, as Peg is suggesting, is a doorway into right view, which to me seems different from negating or trying to get rid of the original feeling tone. Again, that's just the way I wrote it down because that is appealing to me as a framework. So thank you, Anne, for that great question. Lori, so I can probably hear you or however works for you. And I have to say I have a little bit of a time constraint. So Lori and then Rosemary, and then I have to go.
Okay. So I just wanted to get some clarity around, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I just wanted to get some clarity around something very basic, I guess, and that is right view. My understanding, and maybe it's because I've been reading a lot of Theravada stuff, that right view is actually the awareness of, or for lack of another word, of the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths being recognizing, being aware that you're suffering or dissatisfied, whatever word you want to use. And the second thing that there's a cause, and we'll say it's clinging. And so we work to find out what that is. And then lastly, it's the Eightfold Path. So I'm wondering, that's my understanding. Like I say, I read a lot of Theravada stuff, which is, I don't know where I got that from. So I wonder how that fits into the scenario of the exercise of what you're saying.
You know how Suzuki Roshi says the most important thing is, and then he has a whole bunch of different answers about that. Apparently the Buddha did that some too as well, because in the sutras where he's talking about the Vedanās, he says that contemplation of the structure and unfolding of the Vedanās and their emptiness or their insubstantiality is a pathway into right view. So it is not exclusively through the Eightfold Path or through the language of the Eightfold, the Four Noble Truths, that there are other sutras in which he says contemplating and dealing with these is also leading into leading into right view, and that's why I read that quote. It's from one of those sutras. So yeah. Does that answer your question? I don't see it as a contradiction, but as an extension.
Yeah, I think that the Four Noble Truths is actually the practice of really paying close attention to what's arising and what the clinging is behind it, and then starting to see the causes and conditions and so forth, and then
Mhm.
Eightfold Path falls into that. But
Yeah.
I'm just
And then
curious.
one of the ways of doing that is to pay attention to these foundational parts of your mind, which you can never get away from and are going to keep popping up over and over again, right? Until you reach nirvana and pass out of existence.
All righty.
Okay. Thank you. So
Joel.
Rosemary,
Hi, I'll try and make this quick. Well, a few things. In the meditation, I did notice something slightly unpleasant that as I began to talk to the two people in the group, I realized it was actually more unpleasant than I thought. And it had to do with making order, and that it just, when something is out of order, it makes me feel very unsafe and anxious. And I gave it some space and a lot of compassion for why that would be for me. And that's, what Peg was describing. But I also love this. I see them as three different ways of perceiving what's happening. So when things are going well and I'm feeling good, or we're feeling good, it's sort of like a caution to say, why is that better? Why is it better? It's different, feeling good, but it's not better. There's like days that go really, in difficult ways, and we feel bad. And that's what I like about the first one. I'm not sure about how the other two, how they actually work, but I think that's a good training when things are going well, to say, okay, it's like, okay, that's this, and it's not better, it's just different. Thanks.
thank you, Rosemary. That matches my experience very closely also, that there are, these feeling tones come in and they seem to have a lot of force. They seem to require that respond, certain responses, but by holding them in a bigger space, we can say, well, why? Why does that have to be true? So, friends, I'm afraid, Laurie, I'm sorry, I have to go. Laura is waiting for me in the car. And this has been so wonderful for me. Thank you. But I'm going to actually have to leave and miss the closing ceremony. So beg your pardon for that. So
Thank you, Joe.